Good. Um, the first thing that I think it's really advisable to do if you're writing a grant application is to read the grant guidelines. You'll find them on the web. Uh, I found mine in the newsletter that comes from the media group, and you'll also find application forms as well, and there are links that you can follow. This year is really going to be quite something different. If you read the guidelines, you'll see that this year the Uniting Foundation has partnered with UC Invest, and UC Invest has provided quite a lot more money so that the money that's available to make grants to individuals, to congregations, or to groups of congregations is much larger than it would normally be. So that's the first thing to notice. The second thing to note is that there are two types of grants. Category A are enduring grants. These are the sorts of grants that might run over several years. I was saying to Amy a while ago that up till now, there have been multi-year grants that the Foundation Grants Committee made, but they've rarely been more than 2 years. Some have been 3, but I can't think of any that were more than 3. But this opens up longer-term possibilities. I think you would have to take into account, though, the possibility of that over the course of the time that a longer-term grant might run, that the financial circumstances might change, and you would need to bear that in mind as you write up your grant. Is this in fact sustainable? Can we get it off grant money and onto some self-generated money down the track? The other sort of grants are UC Invest Springboard grants. These are quite significant sums of money, up to $50,000. And they really are committing money to help congregations, individuals, faith communities engage in mission and ministry, and you'll see what they understand by mission and ministry in the guidelines, so that the church can enhance its engagement with the wider community, build up the services that it offers, and help grow the impact of the church in the life of the community. So they're the two categories of grants. And the purpose of all of this, as the guidelines will suggest, is that these grants will significantly increase the mission effectiveness of the Uniting Church in South Australia. And that's the key element. As you write your grant, you've got to be able to portray a picture, tell a story about how the project that you've devised, you've dreamed, you've envisaged, can increase the mission effectiveness of the church in South Australia. Many do that. Some have more potential than others. So don't lose heart because you can't always find the words that you might want to find. If there's a story and if there's a vision, just write the story that expresses your vision, and the grants committee will listen and read, and the vision might be captured there as well. Now, the next thing I'd like to talk about is the grant criteria. In the past, the grant criteria have been very limited. There's only been 3 or 4 categories or criteria against which projects are being evaluated. This time, there's a huge list and that should give you some guidance as to the sort of um, grant that you might pursue, so that it, it it might stimulate your thinking. And along the way, you'll need to ensure that the project grant application that you put in reflects those criteria, one or more of them. It might be several, so that you can demonstrate to the people who are reading your application that you're on track, and what you're proposing fits into the funding guidelines. That's a really key thing. So don't try to move outside, because members of the committee have worked these things through and are committed to them as the best way. If these things get funded, that's the best way that the committee can imagine that the mission effectiveness of the Uniting Church in South Australia will be assisted. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, I don't think any of you are representing groups that are not eligible. So, Amy, presbyteries can't apply and ministry centres can't apply. And in a way, that's a bit unfortunate, because sometimes ministry centres really have got some fantastic ideas that would enhance the mission effectiveness of the church, but their departmental budget doesn't allow it. So anyway, I think just from what you've been saying, everybody here would qualify. If you've had a previous grant or an existing grant, and you haven't complied with the terms of that grant, then don't expect another one. So if you haven't finished and there are money that's hasn't been expended, you can't dip again into the fund. If your congregation's not up to date with its mission and service fund, you can't apply. And that's something that's taken pretty seriously by the committee. And if you're already in receipt of a grant, then you can't apply for another Category A grant, which is basically the sort of thing that you already have, and you're expected to finish it before you move on to something else. But you can apply for a Category B grant. So read the guidelines carefully. They'll help you and give you some guidance as to how you might approach the write-up of your project. Next, timeframes. The grant round is already open, and as you will have seen, the application forms are available. The final date is the 31st of July. So you've got basically 1 month to do all the work, to share your idea with others in your congregation, get their feedback, write it up, put together a business case, talk with HR if needed about a position description and a pay rate if you're intending to employ anybody. All those things have to be done, and your application has to be in before the 31st of July. There's always more requests for more money than the money available. And consequently, it's just an easy way to put some things aside if they don't get in on time. It just helps reduce the pool and makes decision-making a little bit easier, unfortunately. And I think over the years, most applicants have understood that, and as a consequence have made sure they get their requests in on time. and you will get an answer within 6 weeks of the date of meeting of the committee, and the committee will meet quite soon after the end of July. Okay, and then funds will become available very soon after that. So be prepared if you get a grant for a quick startup. Don't leave it for 6 or 9 months before you get going. Plan, if you get a grant, we're away. We'll get things underway. And that way, you'll make sure that you achieve your goals and expend your budget within the time that you've specified as a condition of your grant. So the last page has to do with what mission is, and it's a very broad definition, but you'll need to think about that in terms of mission effectiveness. So it might be evangelism, it might be some worship activity, it might be a social justice project, it could be a wide variety of things, but use those insights into the nature of mission and ministry in order to give some shape and definition to your own project. That's pretty important. Okay. There is something interesting here as part of those Category B Springboard grants, is that you can apply for funds for a capital project. Now, this is most unusual. I mean, there has been money that's given to, for example, as I recall, for enhancing kitchen facilities because you're running a drop-in centre that requires food preparation. So in order to make that possible, then some funds have been made available for that sort of reason. But capital projects are generally not funded. They're usually program grants that are made. And I think anyone's going to look very closely at a capital project and ask, how is this going to enhance the mission effectiveness of the Uniting Church in South Australia? And which of the grant criteria does it match up with? And it's always a bit hard to do that with a capital grant application.
Joy, I think you've got your hand there.
Yes, I have. The point 2 under the what else do you need to know, it says grants are not intended to support the continuous or ongoing delivery of a service, program or activity. So if the church has started some activity and then wants to leverage off that because it's been done by volunteers and now we need some funds to continue, does that automatically preclude it, that point 2?
I don't think so necessarily, provided it's a new activity and provided it is in fact moving forward with something that you might have already sown the seeds for.
Literally.
Yes.
Right.
A vegetable garden, for example. Yeah.
Okay, so because I looked at that and I thought, oh, goodness, because one would think that you'd want to encourage the development of something that is started.
Yes, provided it's about the development, not the maintenance. That's the key thing.
The development and expansion.
Yes. Something new, something that takes you further, faster.
So in
towards new horizons.
Yes. So in the grant application, should you refer to what's already happening, to identify why you want to improve on that or expand that or whatever?
There's no harm. It's part of the story that you've got to tell, and it might be the source of the vision that you've developed. So, but do it briefly.
Yes.
You need to talk about the next step, not the last step.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
Great questions. Anyone else before Peter moves on? No? Go for it, Peter.
Okay. Well, we had Amy and I had an exchange of emails with Lisa, and Lisa suggested some useful things that you might think about that I thought were really good comments. She says, so if you come up with an idea, then ask yourself which of the grant criteria aligns with your idea, or other way round, perhaps better, your idea aligns with which one of the grant criteria. And if you can be precise about that, that's certainly a real help to helping people grasp what you're trying to achieve. And you could also ask yourself, have I demonstrated in my evaluation of my own application, have I demonstrated successfully this link between what we're asking to fund or have funds provided for and one or other of the grant criteria? Have I demonstrated that clearly? You could also ask yourself, have we thought sufficiently about the timelines? Have we allowed ourselves enough time? Are we moving too slowly with what we're proposing? And then I think you can also ask questions like, have we got the people resources in order to do what we're seeking funds to enable? And certainly in the congregation I'm part of, I think there's hardly a person that's not engaged already in some sort of significant ministry as a layperson. And, if someone in our congregation wanted to start up something new, but they would have a real issue about how it's going to be staffed, if it's to be staffed by volunteers. As people are heavily loaded and doing some wonderful things. So have we got the existing people who could volunteer? Do we need to employ staff? If we're employing staff, have we got a position description that's clear, well written, and has been looked at by people, say, in HR, who are willing to give advice? Have we established appropriate salary payment, salary arrangements? Have we got the system in place that's going to make employing another person possible? One of the things that has always been a bit of a difficulty for some congregations is having a business plan. Some people find them really easy to write. I mean, there's every likelihood that you've got someone in your congregation who runs a business. And you can always, even though they might not be involved in shaping the heart of the project, use them, get them to have a look at and help you develop perhaps a business plan so that you've got some idea of timelines, of the skill level that's required, of how the project will fit with your wider congregational budget, whether your own congregational budget needs to contribute something. Are people prepared to do that? And there are a great many questions, but draw on the skills that someone in your congregation is almost certain to have, who's prepared business plans either for others or for themselves, and use those people's skills. And think about the structure of a business plan. Sometimes you'll find things online, a model business plan. See what you can find and then follow that. I've done that on numerous occasions and found that very successful. I can't help you with your specific application, but if you have any questions of a more general nature, I'm more than happy to reflect on those questions with you and see where they lead us. But I'm not going to champion anyone's particular project. Yes. My wife's writing a grant application at the moment for another group, and we're not talking at all. And it's proving a very interesting exercise when we have people meeting in our house and I can't go there. So I'm keeping my distance, but I'll help it with anything of a general nature that I'm able to.
We have a question here from Bonnie. If the church's new mission grant idea will require employing a person or two, and there isn't time to work with Synod HR to generate a job and person spec about wages, should the process be worked through and then applied for next year?
Oh, look, I think a month is enough. If you're clear about what the project is and what the skill set is that the person you want to employ or the people you want to employ, and what the required skill set is, I think you ought to be able to put that into a position description and then shoot it off to HR for an indication of the sort of pay scale. Although there is a lot in the way of pay scales for things like clerk's jobs or storeman, I'm just pulling these off the top of my head. On the web, you can find what the scale is there, and then within the range, you can establish a link and a level rather, and that maybe gives you the basis for a conversation with HR. And I'm pretty committed. I think they'll be committed to getting you a reply, which isn't going to hold up your application.
Yeah,
So get going early, and have a think about that. But it is, I feel for you, because it's quite a difficult and can be quite onerous task to get something ready that's going to hold water when you get to the grant committee.
Do they have to include the PD in the grant application?
Normally you do, yes.
Okay. So it's good it definitely sounds like it's worth just getting to it and starting the process with HR as soon as you can. Something you're thinking about? And I think they do have some templates and things like that, or at least that some of those basic bits of information. It's worth just starting by asking. They might already have someone employed somewhere, or another congregation. I was just thinking as you were talking, another congregation might have employed someone else in a similar kind of role. Even, you never know, if you're friends with that congregation, you could just ask the question, do you mind if we alter the one that you have? People generally, I've found, are quite wonderful at sharing their resources, so you don't have to start from scratch. Have you got anything else on that list of yours there, Peter?
No, I think that's all I want to say by way of helping or providing assistance. But I think I come back to the central thing. Ensure that your project always relates to that issue that the grants are designed to achieve, mission effectiveness. And the criteria will give you guidance as to the type of effectiveness or area of effectiveness, and then tell a story and communicate the vision that you have for moving ahead, so that you can engage with the world in more effective ways. And then the rest, is the mechanics. And a lot of the times the mechanics not so hard. It's telling the story and capturing the vision and sharing that's the hard thing. So you're invited, after specifying who the applicant is, and that's basically the contact person, you're invited then to talk briefly about the nature of your congregation or faith community, its context, and its demography and its vision. So to speak about the congregation I'm part of, we're surrounded by 5 shopping centres. We're right in the middle, us and our car park. And we've got this busy commercial area right around us. So you would think that if we were putting together a project, it would take that context into mind. It might be at Maitland, you're thinking about a much more dispersed community, and you would want to show that your project, for example, might, just as one thought, address the separation, the dispersion of the community in your area. So you talk about your congregation and its life, who you've got in it, where you're placed, and what you're currently doing. That can be done quite briefly, and if you struggle, write something long, and then get other people's help to do something shorter. Mark Twain is said to have said in a letter, "I had to write you a long letter because I didn't have time to write you a short one." And it's a lovely thought. I used to tell my students, postgraduate students, to do that. Write me a long essay. If that's all you can manage, we'll cut it down and find the essence of it in due course. But get it on paper. That's the main thing. Then you'll have to indicate what presbytery you belong to, whether or not your mission and service fund contributions are up to date. We'll know that anyway because we'll get a report that will tell us, and then what category of grant you're applying for, an enduring grant or a UC Invest Springboard grant. And then think up a name for your project. It might be quite prosaic, like, we want to train people for pastoral visiting because we have an increasing number of people with whom we have contact that are housebound. Something like that, who knows? But a project name that's brief, pithy, and captures the essence of what you're trying to do. And then after that, there's a little section there that just explains in a few words what you want to do, that just try and capture that essence. And then you get to the project rationale that asks you to describe the project benefits and the missional goals. And why does this need to be done? And what opportunities are out there that you wish to pursue? And that's followed by what objectives and outcomes, what measurables can you establish that will indicate whether or not you've been successful. So someone who's perhaps putting forward an application for funds to assist with a new church plant might say, we're working with 20 people, we expect at the end of 1 year that we'll have 40 people involved. Something measurable so that when you report, it's possible to assess the outcomes relative to what you sought money for. And then you get to the some of the mechanisms. When will the project start? When do you expect it to finish? And what are the key milestones? And the milestones are quite significant. You need to think, okay, after 3 months, where do we expect to be? After 6 months, after 12 months? Because they'll give you an idea of how you're going. So it's for you as much as it is for the committee. Committee will ask, how realistic is this timeline? Is it genuinely likely that it'll be able to be achieved in, say, 12 months? Or is this just pie in the sky? And then you come up with your funding, and the funding can be in quite broad categories initially. So it might be materials, consumables, wages and salaries, and something as simple as that, and a total. But then later on, as part of your business plan, you might want to itemise what the consumables might be, what the material costs for equipment might be, what the salary costs, the on costs, and those things might also be. So see this potentially as a summary and add additional details down the track. Now, in the next little area, it's got total cost of the project, and you're also asked whether there's a self-funding component. And something like this is often thought of as a way of gauging just how committed a congregation might be to what it's proposing to do. So lots of granting bodies will ask, if you are not, this one doesn't particularly, but bear it in mind, they'll ask, if we don't give you money, will you be able still to start? Money short. You know, we think what you're doing is good, but will you be able to actually start even at a diminished level? And you need to think about that. So think what your own congregational resources are, what you can put in as an indication of your commitment and willingness to make all of this happen. Have you got some passion, enough passion that, you know, we've got 6 people and we're all committed, and this is what money we've been able to raise. And, you know, we think we could do much more if we were successful with our grant application. And then if you're applying for other funds, which may be the case, then you need to specify what you're applying for and from whom. Okay, and then at the bottom of that page, there's questions about sustainability. So is the project one that can move off grant money and become self-sustaining? And that's, if you're planning for the long term, you have to think about that, because grant money is not going to be always available. And if you think it's something worth doing, then you know, you've got to plan for transitioning from grant to other forms of money. A congregation I was part of in Hobart held a consultation with local service providers and found 3 things that they thought was really important in that community, and they couldn't do it. And they suggested to the congregation might like to take it on board. And the congregation talked about it. They chose one, and that project ran for 20 years and was enormously successful. It was very simple, a once-a-month shopping trip for people who were shut-ins, followed by a hot roast lunch at the church once a month. And those people kept coming till they passed away. And it was enormously influential and significant in the life of the community around the church. It ran for 20 years. Now, you're not going to get 20 years of grant money, that's for sure. But it was the sort of thing that eventually became sustainable. Then the next section asks you for your congregation's strategic plan. How does the project that you're applying for funds fit into the congregation's larger vision for engagement with its local community? In what ways will this augment the sorts of things that your congregation's already doing, so that your mission effectiveness is enhanced? And that's important and must be answered. You can't duck that one. And if you need more space, attach a sheet. Some congregation strategic plans are quite extensive. So you might outline what currently is being thought of, but then you move on into how does what we're proposing actually enhance that. Amy, you had a query?
I just wondered if it's also, is it referring to the Uniting Churches strategic plan?
Yes, in part, but
Okay.
also to the congregation strategic.
Okay.
The Synod has recently done a lot of work on the strategic plan and developed quite a sophisticated outline of what it thinks are the new directions that the church should be heading in, and the congregation should already be taking that into account as they develop their own plans. So it really has that dual focus. And again, if you like, it's matching criteria to your project application. Is this in the direction that the wise heads within the church think we ought to be moving? And it's going to take a bit of thought. Talk about it. Share what you're doing with a wider group of people than just the people who are writing the application, and get their feedback. That's a good strategy. And then you come to that bit that I mentioned earlier on with the mission and business plan, and then the risk management section after that. What could go wrong? That's almost everything, in fact, could go wrong. But some things are low risk, that they're not very likely to occur, and they wouldn't be too troublesome if they did. Some things are low risk, but they might be highly significant if they did. Your minister might be murdered, or who knows. But so there's usually a risk matrix that is on the web. Have a look at those risk matrices, and they relate to the level of risk, low frequency, moderate frequency, high frequency, and the consequences if it occurs, minor, significant, and major. And you work out for the various things, it might be your key coordinator comes down with COVID for months on end, or the car that's essential to the activity suffers a major breakdown. Whatever they might be, they're two fairly stupid risks that might arise. But work it through and spell out what the key risks might be, how likely they are to occur, and finally, what you might do in order to guard against the risk. And this is one of the areas where Amy's comment about being child safe and everybody who's involved having a clearance, these things are really important. Making sure that people go through training sessions, wear appropriate clothing if necessary, are skilled in handling any tools that might be involved in the project. Things, if you're doing a construction job, just like I've done recently with some paving at the church, have you got some barriers that stop people walking onto the work site? Think about all the risks and how they might be managed. And once you've done all that, told your story, lodged your application, sit back and wait, and you'll have an answer within 6 weeks.
Wonderful. All right. Seems like we have covered all the areas that we set out to try and cover. Just want to thank you, Peter, for your time and for everyone attending.
Oh, my
been
pleasure.
great.
And I must say, I'm really looking forward to reading your application. So I shall get my teeth stuck into them with a great deal of interest.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And thank you for sharing your delight and your passion for it all, because it certainly makes it feel less huge and momentous of trying to apply, but you've made it seem far more achievable.
Good. That's what it was all intended to do. Have a go, tell your story, share your vision, and add a few nuts and bolts underneath.